And I kind of try to move away sometimes, and it just pulls me back.
For nearly 20 years, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban were sold to America as the rare miracle that actually worked. While other celebrity marriages collapsed under ego, addiction, and temptation, theirs stood tall, or so we were told. But behind the perfectly timed red carpet smiles and tearful award show speeches, something darker was slowly unfolding. The truth is, this marriage didn't end suddenly. It decayed quietly, painfully, and in full view if you knew where to look. Nicole didn't just walk away from a husband. She walked away from a role she had been trapped in for years. And Keith? His first move after the split wasn't a statement or an apology. It was a public unraveling on stage, without his wedding ring, rewriting lyrics like confessions he could no longer keep inside. This wasn't just a divorce. It was the collapse of a carefully protected illusion. And once you see how it truly began, you'll understand why the ending was inevitable. Nicole Kidman has never been the fragile ice queen Hollywood likes to portray. Beneath the porcelain skin and controlled elegance is a woman shaped by loss, discipline, and emotional survival. Long before Keith Urban entered her life, Nicole had already learned a painful lesson. Love can cost you everything if you surrender too much of yourself. Her marriage to Tom Cruise was not just a high-profile union, it was a masterclass in imbalance. When it ended, she didn't just lose a husband, she lost daily access to her children, and that kind of loss leaves scars that never fully fade. By the time Nicole met Keith, she was no longer searching for passion alone. She was searching for safety, structure, and permanence. She wanted a family she could protect, control, and never lose again. And that need quietly shaped the role she would take in her second marriage. Nicole didn't just love Keith, she managed him. She organized the life, stabilized the chaos, and became the emotional center, holding everything together. To the outside world, this looked like devotion. To Nicole, it felt like responsibility. Over time, love and duty blurred into something heavier. When you've been hurt the way she has, letting go feels reckless. Control feels like survival. And slowly, without drama or headlines, Nicole Kidman became less a wife and more a guardian, something that would eventually cost her the very peace she was trying to protect. Keith Urban has always been a walking contradiction, extraordinarily gifted, deeply sensitive, and perpetually restless. From the moment he picked up a guitar as a child, music became both his escape and his addiction. Long before drugs or alcohol entered the picture, Keith was already chasing relief from something he could never quite name. Fame didn't create his demons, it simply gave them a bigger stage. By the time he met Nicole Kidman, Keith had already battled addiction publicly and privately. Rehab wasn't a warning sign, it was part of his rhythm. Sobriety, for Keith, was never a destination. It was a daily negotiation. And while Nicole admired his vulnerability, she also feared it. Loving a man like Keith requires constant vigilance, and over time, vigilance becomes exhausting. Keith loved Nicole deeply, but he also struggled under the weight of her stability. Her discipline highlighted his chaos. Her control reminded him of his own lack of it. As the years passed, he began to feel defined by his past rather than trusted in his present. To be eternally grateful is one thing. To feel eternally supervised is another. Music remained his refuge, touring gave him freedom, the stage allowed him to feel whole in ways domestic life never fully did. And slowly, the very qualities Nicole once found endearing his intensity, his emotional rawness, became sources of friction. Keith wasn't trying to self-destruct, but he was quietly suffocating under the pressure of being the man who needed saving forever. Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban didn't just have a marriage, they had a brand. For years, they represented hope in an industry famous for failure. Interviews praised their commitment. Award speeches reinforced their devotion. Red carpets displayed effortless intimacy. But anyone who understands Hollywood knows one truth. The more perfect a couple appears publicly, the harder they're often working privately. Behind closed doors, their marriage required constant maintenance. Schedules clashed. Tours stretched on. Film shoots pulled Nicole across continents. They created rules to stay connected, but rules don't replace emotional alignment. Over time, affection became intentional rather than instinctive. Love turned into effort. Nicole wanted predictability. Keith needed motion. She thrived on order. He survived on expression. These differences didn't explode, they eroded. Arguments weren't scandalous. They were quiet, unresolved, repetitive. The kind that drain intimacy slowly rather than destroy it all at once. And still, they performed the fairy tale, not just for the public, but for themselves. Admitting the truth would mean admitting that love wasn't enough, that endurance had replaced joy, that survival had replaced connection. In Hollywood, image is currency, and Nicole and Keith spent years investing in an image that no longer reflected their private reality. By the time cracks became visible, the foundation had already weakened beyond repair. Nicole Kidman's relationship with motherhood is deeply tied to loss. Having once lost daily access to her children, she approached raising Sunday and Faith with intensity, structure, and fierce protectiveness. Routine mattered, stability mattered. Shielding them from chaos mattered. For Nicole, family was sacred and fragile. Keith Urban loved his daughters, but his relationship with parenting was looser, more instinctive. He wanted to be present, playful, emotionally available. But touring made consistency difficult, and Nicole's structured approach sometimes felt like criticism rather than collaboration. Over time, small differences in parenting philosophy became emotional fault lines. Nicole feared instability. Keith feared confinement. She wanted to protect her children from unpredictability. He worried about losing himself in responsibility. Neither was wrong, they were simply different. Raising children under the spotlight amplified every disagreement. Decisions weren't just personal, they were strategic. Privacy had to be engineered. Normalcy had to be manufactured. And the pressure to appear united for the sake of the children often meant burying unresolved tension. As the girls grew older, Nicole became even more protective, especially as the marriage weakened. She wasn't going to repeat history. If something broke, she wanted to be the constant. And quietly, her priorities shifted from saving the marriage to securing her children's emotional future. By the early 2022s, the signs were there for anyone paying attention. Fewer shared appearances, more separate schedules, carefully worded interviews that emphasized work and commitment rather than happiness. This wasn't sudden collapse, it was prolonged denial. Nicole and Keith didn't stop loving each other overnight. They stopped understanding how to live together without losing themselves. Conversations became negotiations. Silence replaced intimacy. And still, they held on, partly out of hope and partly out of fear. Nicole feared another public fracture of family. Keith feared failure personally and publicly. Together, they maintained the illusion long after it had stopped serving them. But denial has an expiration date, and when it arrives, clarity can be brutal. By 2025, separation wasn't dramatic, it was inevitable. The question was no longer, can this be fixed, but how much more of ourselves are we willing to lose trying? Nicole chose herself, quietly, decisively, and that choice changed everything. Nicole Kidman filed for divorce without spectacle. No interviews, no accusations, just paperwork and resolve. It was the goodbye of someone who had already grieved privately. Keith Urban's goodbye, however, played out under stage lights. His first performance without his wedding ring said more than any press release ever could. The lyric changes weren't accidental, they were emotional eruptions. Anger, hurt, confusion, nostalgia, all delivered through music because that's the only language Keith has ever trusted completely. Where Nicole retreated inward, Keith exploded outward. One chose silence, the other chose sound, and that contrast perfectly captured why their marriage could no longer work. Fans debated sides, but the truth was simpler. They were processing the same loss in opposite ways, and neither could follow the other there anymore. The divorce of Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban wasn't a failure of love, it was the end of endurance masquerading as romance. For years, they proved that commitment could survive addiction, fame, and pressure. What they couldn't prove was that it could survive emotional misalignment forever. Nicole walked away to preserve herself and her children. Keith stayed on the stage to confront his pain honestly. Neither is the villain, neither is the hero. They are simply human, deeply flawed, deeply talented, and finally honest. Their story reminds us that staying isn't always strength. Sometimes, leaving is. In the end, the marriage of Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban didn't collapse in scandal, betrayal, or a single dramatic moment. It ended the way many real marriages do, quietly, after years of emotional negotiation, unspoken compromises, and private exhaustion. That's what makes this story resonate so deeply, especially for those who have lived long enough to understand that love is not just about passion, but endurance, sacrifice, and knowing when the cost becomes too high. For nearly 20 years, Nicole carried the role of stabilizer. She protected the family, guarded the image, and absorbed the emotional weight of loving a man whose past never fully loosened its grip. Keith, in turn, gave her devotion, gratitude, and vulnerability, but also asked her to live forever on alert. Neither set out to hurt the other. They simply grew in different directions, shaped by different fears. Nicole feared losing everything again. Keith feared losing himself. What the public witnessed after the divorce was not bitterness, but contrast. Nicole chose restraint, privacy, and her children. Keith chose music, confession, and the raw exposure of the stage. Two valid responses to grief, yet completely incompatible with one another, and perhaps that truth had always been there, waiting for the moment neither could ignore it any longer. The end of their marriage also marks the end of a myth Hollywood sells relentlessly, that love alone can heal addiction, trauma, and incompatible emotional needs. It can help, it can support, but it cannot replace personal alignment, shared rhythm, or mutual emotional freedom. Sometimes, love survives, but the marriage doesn't, and that distinction matters. For viewers over 50, this story hits differently. It's not gossip, it's reflection. It's a reminder of relationships you may have lived through, endured, or walked away from. It's proof that choosing yourself after decades of giving is not failure, it's wisdom, and that staying too long can sometimes be more damaging than leaving with dignity. As Nicole Kidman steps into a new chapter focused on peace and motherhood, and Keith Urban continues to pour his heart into music, their story stands as a powerful lesson. Fairy tales don't end when people stop loving each other. They end when people stop being able to live truthfully together. Now, we want to hear from you. Do you believe Nicole made the right choice by walking away? Was Keith's public response a cry for understanding or proof of deeper issues? And do you think some marriages are meant to last forever, or just long enough to teach us who we really are? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into the hidden truths behind Hollywood's most iconic relationships. Your voice matters, and the conversation continues.